You've probably stumbled upon virtual environments looking at other people's code or looking at other tutorials and wondered, what are they and how are they different than Conda? This week, we're going to solve that mystery. Welcome to another MetPy Monday. Hello, I'm John Lehman, a software engineer for Unidata. This week I want to talk about virtual environments because really since the beginning of MetPy Mondays, now quite a few years ago, about all I've talked about is Conda. And that's because that's what we use, that's what we recommend. I think it's a great platform for scientists, data scientists, and really just about anybody to use to manage their Python environments. It's been a common pain point for years. And while Conda doesn't perfectly solve that, it's a really good solution. But you often see virtual environments out there in the world. You see them in tutorials, you see them in documentation, you see them in some projects that use this to help manage their development environment. And I thought it'd be useful to talk about what they are and why you might use them and demonstrate them a little bit. Because though that's not what I use, it may be what you use or your research group uses. And there are certainly some really nice advantages to them, and Conda has some advantages too. So while I'm not a totally unbiased party, I'm going to do my best to spell out a few of the pros and cons of each. Virtual environments, for one, are part of Python. You don't have to install Conda, you don't have to use any third-party tool. And they create really lightweight environments. Now, those environments are on top of the base Python install. And that environment lives within a local directory. It's within your project or wherever you want to put it on your system. Conda, on the other hand, is a third-party tool. It doesn't just manage the packages, but it manages the entire environment. It is language agnostic, which can be good or bad, I guess. Probably not bad, but if you're using something other than Python, Conda is what you're going to need to use because VENV is built into Python, so it is language dependent. Conda's model is also that of centralized management. So the environments all live in one place that Conda manages. Conda does manage multiple versions of Python, so you're not building on top of base or system Python. It can do any versions you want. You can have multiple versions at the same time. You can have a 2.7 and a 3.9. And there are other channels on Conda, such as Conda Forge, that have tons of community installable packages, though a lot of those are available through pip, which you can get to through virtual environments. So what's more common? Well, for data science, science in general, you and me doing meteorology every Monday together, I think Conda is a better tool. It takes care of worrying about multiple Python versions. I don't have to worry about clobbering my system Python and changing the way that, say, some GIS software operates. And it's a lot tighter encapsulation. Now, that does come at the expense of storage, though. And with a lot of us running on laptops with small SSDs, that is an issue sometimes. Now, SSDs are getting larger every day, so maybe it won't be an issue forever. I have 2 terabytes in this particular machine, but I would say that's not the norm. Now, in software dev, virtual environment is still pretty dominant. If people are building web apps and that sort of thing, a lot of those tutorials are using VENV. VENV is smaller, and it is local, and it runs on the system Python. Now, as I mentioned, I think running on the system Python is a little bit risky. I use Conda even in production on servers. But really, as a scientist, I don't think you can beat Conda. But you're going to need to know VMs at some point because you're going to run onto a project that uses them. So let's together take a little bit of a look at how we can use virtual environments. Now, since I do want to avoid touching my system Python, I have created an environment with Conda called VM's demo. So we're actually going to be running inside of that. It's a little bit pointless at this point, but it's a good show of how you can do this, and if you do run onto a project that uses VMs, this is one way you can accomplish doing that without touching the system Python. All right, so I'm in my environment. Now we're going to create our virtual environment. I'm going to use the command python-m VENV env. and env is the name of the environment. Generally, most developers just call it ENV, but you could call it anything you want. So you saw on the desktop here a folder popped up called env, and if we open that, we'll see inside that there is an include, a lib, a scripts, and an env config file. You can explore these a little bit if you want. There's also lots of detailed documentation on what's in all of them. But again, I think it's nice to show that at the end of the day, all of these things we're doing aren't magic. They're just dealing with files on disk. So now we need to activate that environment. Now you don't have to activate your environment. You can just use bang at the beginning of your script. You could do something like this. So this is path to env bin python. And that should be the absolute path. And that will use that Python, that virtual environment for that script. But let's say we do want to activate it. On Windows, we're going to use /env scripts activate. On Unix, it's just going to be source env bin activate for you. And now we see that we're actually in the env VENV and the VM's demo. A little confusing there. And deactivate leaves the environment, just like with Conda. So how do you install things? Well, there's all the standard ways. At the end of the day, this is Python. So pip, local or git archives, you can compile from source, really whatever you want. For example, I could pip install MetPy. It's going to go out, collect MetPy, collect the dependencies for MetPy, and it's going to do the installation. So nothing too out of the ordinary there. All right, so now if I wanted to open Python and import MetPy, it's going to work because we've installed MetPy into this VENV. So I'm going to go ahead and quit out of that. But how can we share a virtual environment? We've talked about how to share environment files for Conda, and we can do something very similar with VMs. We're going to use the pip freeze command, and I'm going to redirect the output of that to requirements.txt, which is the standard name we use for things like this. If we open requirements.txt and take a look, we see that we have all the packages that are installed, but notice they are all hard pinned to their exact version, which could be a good or a bad thing depending on what you want, I suppose. If you want an exact replication of that environment, as often developers do for deploying web apps, well, this works just fine. But if it's going to be a file that is used for years, say in your research group, you probably don't want to pin everybody to years old versions of software. So again, it really depends on what your use is, and of course you can go in and modify these files. If I want to get rid of my environment, I can just delete this folder, and then my environment will be gone. And now we have our requirements file that described that environment. So we want to figure out, well, how can we recreate the environment just using that requirements file? We're going to string together several commands here. We use python -m venv env. Remember, that's how we created our environment. Then we're going to run after that the activate for the environment. So /env scripts activate. Remember, if you're on a Unix-based system, you'll modify that very slightly. And finally, we're going to run pip install -r requirements.txt. So it's going to create the virtual environment, activate it, and install the requirements.txt file using pip. So that's one way that you could share that environment, and somebody else could recreate it very easily. I hope that you found this useful, and that now when you see a VM, you're not scared to just go ahead and set that up to try to use that software. I'll see you on next week's MetPy Monday.